Hey everyone, tonight I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow morning and finding out that every single thing you've ever learned about success, about survival, about what makes a civilization advanced was completely wrong. I'm serious about this. Think about it. You probably consider yourself pretty capable, right? You've got skills. You can figure things out. You adapt. You look at ancient civilizations and think, yeah, I could probably handle that. I mean, how hard could it be? Well, tonight, we're going to absolutely destroy that confidence, because I want to take you somewhere that would humble every single person watching this video. A place where your college degree means nothing, where your ability to troubleshoot your Wi-Fi router is laughably useless, where your workout routine and your dietary restrictions and your entire concept of individual choice would get you killed before lunch. We're talking about an empire that built cities in the clouds, moved stones that weigh more than modern skyscrapers without wheels or cranes, and created a society so perfectly organized it makes your smartphone look like a cave painting. And yet, and here's the terrifying part, just existing there would probably kill you within hours. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight and what elevation you're at. Trust me, that number is going to matter more than you think. Maybe grab some water while you're at it. Keep it close. Actually, you know what? Dim the lights if you can. We're about to climb 11,000 feet into the clouds together, because tonight we're visiting the Inca Empire, and you wouldn't survive a day. You wake up in Cusco and you're already dying. I'm not being dramatic here. You literally wake up and your body immediately starts shutting down, because Cusco, the heart of the Inca Empire, the navel of their world, sits at 11,152 feet above sea level. And unless you're one of the few people watching this from Colorado or Tibet, you have absolutely no idea what that means for your body. Most of us live our entire lives under 1,000 feet of elevation. Your lungs, your heart, your blood, everything about your cardiovascular system is calibrated for thick, oxygen-rich air, the kind of air that exists at sea level, where there's plenty of oxygen molecules bumping around, easy to grab. But at 11,000 feet, the air pressure is about 65% of what you're used to, which means every breath you take gives you roughly 2/3 of the oxygen your body is screaming for. And your body, it's not happy about this. Within minutes of waking up in Cusco, you'd feel like you've been running uphill. Your heart starts racing, trying to pump more of this thin, useless air to your organs. Your head begins pounding as your brain realizes it's not getting enough oxygen. You feel dizzy, nauseous, maybe you throw up. Congratulations, you now have acute mountain sickness, and you haven't even gotten out of bed yet. The Inca children playing in the streets outside, they're running around, laughing, completely unbothered, because they were born here. Their ancestors lived here for centuries. Their lungs are bigger, their hearts are stronger, their blood carries more red blood cells. They're literally evolved for this environment. You're a sea-level human trying to function in the sky. And here's the thing that would really mess you up. This isn't just Cusco. The entire Inca Empire existed at altitudes that would destroy most modern people. Machu Picchu sits at 8,000 feet. La Paz, which was part of their territory, is at 12,000 feet. These people built their civilization in the clouds, and they thought nothing of it. But let's say you're tough. Let's say you're one of those people who hikes, who's in good shape, who thinks they can power through anything. You decide you're going to walk around this incredible city, see the sights, maybe grab some food. You take maybe 20 steps and you're gasping. Your legs feel like concrete. That little walk to the corner store that takes you 3 minutes at home. Here, it's an expedition. You're stopping every few yards, hands on your knees, trying to catch your breath like you just ran a marathon. The Inca messengers, the Chasqui, used to run these mountain paths at full sprint, carrying messages across the empire. They'd cover 150 miles in a day, running at altitudes that would put you in the hospital. They'd leap from rock to rock along paths carved into cliff faces, their lungs processing this thin air like it was nothing. Meanwhile, you can't walk to the bathroom without getting winded. And we haven't even talked about the cold yet, because at 11,000 feet, even in summer, the temperature can drop to near freezing at night. The Inca had llama wool and alpaca fiber, clothing designed for these conditions. You've got whatever you were wearing when you went to bed last night, cotton t-shirt, maybe some pajama pants. Good luck with that. But here's what would really finish you off. The sun. At this altitude, there's almost no atmosphere to filter UV radiation. The sun that feels pleasant on your face at sea level becomes a weapon up here. You'd be sunburned to a crisp within hours, even on a cloudy day. The Inca had natural protection, darker skin, clothing that covered everything, hats made from vicuña wool. You'd be lobster red and peeling before noon. So let's recap your first morning in the Inca Empire. You wake up with a splitting headache and nausea from the altitude. You can't walk 20 feet without gasping for air. You're freezing cold, but getting sunburned at the same time. And you haven't even encountered another human being yet. The Inca built their empire in an environment that would kill most modern people just by existing. They didn't see this as a challenge. They saw it as home. They raised families here, built cities here, created art and music and poetry here. They looked at these impossible mountains and said, "This is where we'll build paradise." And they did. They built terraces that turned vertical cliff faces into gardens. They carved channels that brought fresh water from glacial peaks. They constructed buildings that have survived 500 years of earthquakes because they understood the land better than we understand our own backyards. But you're still trying to figure out how to breathe. Welcome to the Inca Empire. Try not to pass out before we get to the really difficult parts. Okay, so let's say somehow, miraculously, you've managed to adapt to the altitude. You're still dizzy, still gasping, but you can at least stand upright without falling over. You stumble outside into the streets of Cusco, and that's when you see something that breaks your brain entirely. The walls around you are made of stones that shouldn't exist. I'm not talking about big rocks. I'm talking about stones that weigh 200 tons. Stones the size of school buses, fitted together so perfectly that you can't slide a knife blade between them. No mortar, no cement, just stone pressed against stone, with a precision that modern construction crews can't replicate with laser-guided equipment. And here's the part that would make you question everything you think you know about engineering. The Inca had no wheels, no pulleys, no iron tools, no written language to record blueprints or construction plans. Yet somehow, they moved these massive stones from quarries miles away, shaped them to fit perfectly, and lifted them into place to build walls that have survived 5 centuries of earthquakes. You're standing there, looking at Sacsayhuaman, this fortress that overlooks Cusco, and your modern brain just can't process what you're seeing. These aren't just big stones stacked on top of each other. These are interlocking blocks, each one custom carved to fit exactly with its neighbors, creating a jigsaw puzzle of megalithic proportions. Some of these stones have 12 angles, 12 perfectly flat surfaces that somehow connect seamlessly with the stones around them. How did they do it? Honestly, we still don't know. Engineers today study these walls and just give up. We've tried to replicate their techniques using modern equipment, and we can't do it. The precision is too perfect, the logistics too impossible. But here you are, a modern person with your smartphone and your engineering degree, standing in front of architecture that makes the pyramids look like a child's building blocks. And you couldn't build a single wall like this if your life depended on it, which in the Inca Empire, it absolutely would, because this isn't just about moving rocks. This is about understanding physics geology, and mathematics at a level that would make MIT professors weep. The Inca knew how to cut stone so precisely that gravity alone holds these walls together. They understood load distribution, seismic resistance, and material properties better than most modern architects. And they did it all without writing anything down. This knowledge lived in their heads, passed from master to apprentice, through generations of stone workers who could look at a mountain and see a city. Let's walk through what building one of these walls would actually require. First, you'd need to identify the right type of stone nearsite, usually a volcanic rock that's incredibly hard to work with. Then you'd need to somehow transport blocks weighing as much as a loaded freight train from quarries that could be 20 miles away over mountain terrain, without wheels, without draft animals bigger than llamas, without even knowing what a crane was. The logistics alone would destroy any modern construction project. We're talking about moving stones that require 200-ton cranes today, using nothing but human labor, ropes, and ramps. The planning required would be astronomical, minus hundreds of workers, coordinated perfectly. Supply chains that stretched across the empire, mathematical calculations that had to be perfect on the first try, because you can't exactly put a 200-ton stone back if you mess up. And then there's the actual stone cutting. The Inca somehow shaped these massive blocks using bronze tools and stone hammers. Bronze, not steel, not diamond-tipped tools. Bronze, that's barely harder than copper. Yet they achieved a level of precision that we measure in fractions of millimeters. Each stone in these walls is unique. There's no standard size, no repeating pattern. Every single block was custom carved to fit its exact position in the wall. Think about that for a second. You're essentially creating a three-dimensional puzzle where every piece has to be perfect, and if you mess up even one piece, the entire section could collapse. But here's what would really humble you. The Inca didn't just build walls, they built roads. 25,000 miles of roads, stretching from Colombia to Chile, crossing deserts and mountains and rivers that would challenge modern highway engineers. Roads with suspension bridges that spanned chasms hundreds of feet deep. Roads carved into cliff faces that would make you dizzy just looking at them. And they built these roads to last, not just for a few years, but for centuries. Spanish conquistadors used these roads to conquer the empire, and some of them are still usable today. 500 years later, and the Inca road system is still more reliable than some modern highways. You know what your contribution to this incredible infrastructure would be? Nothing, less than nothing. You'd be a liability. While Inca engineers were calculating load-bearing requirements for suspension bridges using mental math and practical experience, you'd be trying to figure out how to use a bronze chisel without cutting your fingers off. The Inca looked at the most challenging terrain on Earth and said, "We're going to build here." They took mountains that would intimidate modern engineers and turned them into cities. They created architecture that seems to defy physics, using tools that we'd consider primitive. And they did it all without computers, without GPS, without any of the technology we think is essential for major construction projects. They had human intelligence, collective knowledge, and an understanding of their environment that we've completely lost. Standing in front of these walls, you'd realize that everything you think you know about human capability is wrong. The Inca weren't primitive people who got lucky. They were master engineers who understood their world better than we understand ours. But don't worry, we're just getting started. Because now that you've seen what they could build, let's talk about how they organized the society that built it. So you're standing there, surrounded by impossible architecture, feeling pretty humbled about your complete inability to contribute anything useful to Inca engineering. But here's where things get really uncomfortable for your modern sensibilities. Because in the Inca Empire, there is no you. I'm serious. The concept of individual identity, personal choice, self-determination, everything that defines how you think about yourself as a person, simply doesn't exist here. You're not John from accounting, or Sarah the marketing manager. You're not pursuing your dreams, or finding yourself, or expressing your creativity. You are a function, a cog in a social machine so perfectly organized that it makes modern corporations look like amateur hour. Let's start with the basic unit of Inca society, the Aelu. This is your extended family group, and it determines literally everything about your existence: where you live, what job you do, who you marry, how many children you have, what you eat, what you wear, all of it decided by your Aelu's needs and the state's requirements. You don't get to choose your career based on your interests or talents. Born into a family of farmers? Congratulations, you're a farmer. Your father was a stone worker. Guess what you're learning from age 5? There's no career counseling, no finding your passion, no pivoting to something new because you're having a midlife crisis. And here's the part that would absolutely destroy most modern people. You can't leave. You can't move to a different city, can't transfer to a different Aelu, can't decide you want to try something new. Your identity is locked in from birth, and that's where it stays until you die. But wait, it gets worse, because even within your predetermined role, you don't control your own labor. Every adult male in the empire owed a service to the state mandatory labor that could last months or even years. And when I say mandatory, I mean show up or face execution mandatory. 1 year, the state might decide they need you to build roads, so you leave your family, your crops, your entire life, and you go build roads in the mountains for 6 months. Maybe you're lucky, and they assign you to local construction projects. Maybe you're not, and they send you to work in the silver mines, where you'll probably die of lung disease before you see your family again. The next year, maybe they need soldiers for a conquest campaign. Off you go to fight wars in territories you've never heard of, for reasons no one bothers to explain to you. Or maybe they need farmers to work the state lands, or builders for a new temple, or porters to carry supplies across the empire. You have no say in any of this. The state decides what it needs, and you provide it. Your personal plans, your family obligations, your own survival, none of that matters compared to the empire's requirements. And here's what would really break your modern brain. This system worked. It worked so well that the Inca Empire became the largest empire in pre-Columbian America, stretching over 2,500 miles from north to south. They built cities, roads, irrigation systems, and administrative networks that supported millions of people across incredibly diverse terrain. They did it by treating human beings like interchangeable parts in a massive machine. No individual rights, no personal autonomy, no concept that people might have their own goals and desires separate from the state's needs. But let's talk about what this would mean for you specifically. You, with your modern ideas about personal freedom and individual choice. You, who probably quit jobs you didn't like, and moved cities when you felt like it, and chose your own romantic partners. In the Inca Empire, even your marriage would be arranged by the state. Once a year, the local administrator would line up all the unmarried men and women of appropriate age, and pair them off, based on what served the community's needs. No dating, no falling in love, no choosing someone who shares your interests or makes you laugh. The state needs genetic diversity in this Aelu. You're marrying that person over there. The community needs alliance with a neighboring group. Your marriage is now a diplomatic tool. Your personal feelings about any of this are completely irrelevant. And children, the number of children you have, how they're raised, what they're taught, all determined by state policy. Too many children, and some of them get redistributed to families that need more workers. Too few, and you might be assigned additional spouses to increase production. I'm not exaggerating here. The Inca state controlled reproduction, labor allocation, resource distribution, and social mobility with a precision that would make modern authoritarian governments jealous. They had administrators tracking every family, every worker, every resource in the empire. Through a system of knotted strings called quipo, they knew how many potatoes were stored in every warehouse, how many people lived in every settlement, how many soldiers were available in every province. They could mobilize thousands of workers for major projects, redistribute populations to colonize new territories, and coordinate military campaigns across thousands of miles. And they did it all without written language, without computers, without any of the technology we think is necessary for managing complex societies. They had human memory, oral tradition, and social structures so rigid that deviation was literally unthinkable. You know what your role would be in this incredibly efficient system, whatever they told you it was. Your education, your skills, your personality, your dreams. None of that matters. The state has determined that society needs X number of farmers, Y number of soldiers, Z number of craftsmen, and you'll be assigned to whichever category serves the empire's needs. And here's the truly disturbing part. Most people in the Inca Empire were probably happier than you are, because when your entire identity is defined by your role in a larger system, when your survival is guaranteed as long as you fulfill your function, when personal choice isn't even a concept you can imagine, there's no anxiety about making the right decisions, no stress about career advancement, no wondering if you're living up to your potential. You just do what you're told, and the system takes care of everything else. But you'd go insane within a week. Alright, so you've somehow managed not to suffocate at altitude. You've accepted that you're completely useless as an engineer, and you've had your existential crisis about individual freedom. Now you're getting hungry, and that's when you discover that even something as basic as eating is going to be a nightmare. Because literally nothing, and I mean nothing, that the Inca ate would be familiar to your modern palate. Let's start with the staples. Forget wheat bread, forget rice, forget anything that resembles the carbohydrates your body is used to processing. The Inca diet was built around potatoes, and not the nice bland russet potatoes you know. We're talking about hundreds of varieties of potatoes, many of them bitter, some of them toxic if not prepared correctly, most of them completely inedible by modern standards without extensive processing. The Inca had freeze-dried potatoes called chuño that could last for years in storage. Sounds practical, right? Except chuño looks like gray rocks and has the texture of cardboard soaked in river water. It's nutritious, it keeps you alive, but eating it would be like chewing on despair. And quinoa. Everyone today thinks quinoa is this amazing superfood, right? Well, the Inca version wasn't the pre-washed, pre-packaged stuff you buy at Whole Foods. Traditional quinoa is coated with saponins, natural chemicals that taste like soap and can make you violently ill if you don't wash them off properly. The Inca knew how to process it, spending hours washing and preparing it correctly. You'd probably poison yourself on day one. But here's where it gets really challenging for your modern digestive system. The protein. Forget beef, forget chicken, forget fish. The primary protein sources in the Inca Empire were llama, alpaca, guinea pig, and whatever you could hunt in the mountains. Yes, guinea pig, kodri, as they called it. These cute little animals that you might have had as childhood pets. They were dinner, roasted whole, usually, fur and all in some cases. And if you think you're going to politely decline and go vegetarian, think again. At this altitude, in this climate, your body needs every calorie and every gram of protein it can get just to function. The llama meat that formed a major part of the Inca diet is lean, tough, and has a flavor that most modern people would find challenging. It's not like beef, it's gamey, often dried into jerky-like strips called charqui that could last for months. Nutritious, absolutely, Appetizing to someone raised on McDonald's and grocery store steaks? Not so much. And then there's chicha and a fermented corn beer that was basically the water of the Inca Empire, not because they were all alcoholics, but because fermented beverages were often safer to drink than water, and the calories were essential for survival at altitude. This wasn't craft beer with hoppy notes and smooth finishes. This was thick, chunky, mildly alcoholic corn mash that tasted like liquid bread. The Inca drank chicha for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It was served at every meal, at every ceremony, at every social gathering. Refusing to drink it would be incredibly insulting, but your modern gut bacteria, accustomed to processed foods and filtered water, would probably revolt against this traditional fermented beverage within hours. Here's what would really mess you up though. There's no sugar, no refined anything really. The Inca got their sweetness from occasional honey or sweet potatoes, but the concept of dessert, of candy, of anything resembling the sugar-loaded diet most of us are used to, simply didn't exist. Your body, addicted to the constant sugar hits of modern processed food, would go into withdrawal. You'd be craving sweetness that just isn't available, dealing with energy crashes that the Inca never experienced because their blood sugar was naturally regulated by their whole food diet and portion control. Forget about it. Food was distributed by the state based on what was available and what your work assignment required. If the harvest was bad, everyone ate less. If you were assigned to heavy labor, you got more rations. If you were doing lighter work, you got less. There's no going to the kitchen for a snack, no ordering takeout when you're still hungry. The Inca had sophisticated food storage and distribution systems that could feed millions of people across diverse climates and terrains. They had agricultural techniques that turned mountainsides into productive farmland. They created food preservation methods that could keep supplies fresh for years. But none of that food would taste like anything you've ever eaten. Your modern palate, trained on salt, sugar, and artificial flavors, would find most traditional Inca cuisine bland at best, inedible at worst. So there you are, starving in the middle of an empire with sophisticated food systems, because your body literally doesn't know how to process the fuel that kept one of history's greatest civilizations running. Good thing you're not hungry enough to try the guinea pig yet, but give it another day or two, and we'll see how picky you really are. Okay, so you're hungry, exhausted, and completely out of your depth. But now comes the part that would absolutely shatter your modern worldview, the religion. Because in the Inca Empire, religion isn't something you do on weekends or during major holidays. It's not a personal belief system that you can keep private or practice however you want. Religion is the state. The state is religion, and both of them own your soul. Let's start with the basic concept that would break your brain. The Sapa Inca, the emperor, isn't just a political leader. He's literally a god. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, not symbolically. He is the direct descendant of Inti, the sun god, and he possesses divine power. When he speaks, the sun god is speaking through him. When he makes decisions, those are divine commands. You know how uncomfortable you get when politicians start talking about their religious beliefs. Well, imagine if the president wasn't just influenced by religion, but was literally considered to be a deity walking among mortals. Every law, every policy, every decision comes with the full weight of divine authority behind it. And this isn't just theoretical. The Sapa Inca's divine status affects everything about how society functions. His food is sacred. Any leftovers are burned because they're too holy for normal people to consume. His clothing is sacred, worn once and then destroyed. Even his hair and nail clippings are sacred, carefully collected and preserved, because they contain divine essence. But here's where it gets really intense, for someone with your modern sensibilities. The gods demand sacrifice, not just token offerings, not just prayers and ceremonies. They demand human lives. The practice of kapasha, not ritual child sacrifice, was considered one of the highest honors in Inca society. Beautiful children, often around 10-15 years old, were selected from across the empire to be offered to the gods during major ceremonies or times of crisis. These weren't random killings. They were elaborate rituals that could take months to complete. The chosen children were brought to Cusco, where they were honored, fed the finest foods, dressed in the most beautiful clothing, and treated like royalty. Then they were taken to sacred sites, often mountain peaks, where they were given chicha to drink until they passed out, and then left to die of exposure. The families of these children considered it the greatest honor imaginable. Their child was chosen by the gods. Their sacrifice would ensure the prosperity of the empire. Their death would guarantee their family's elevated status for generations. You, with your modern concept of child protection and individual rights, would find this absolutely horrifying. But refusing to participate, showing disgust or horror at the practice, would mark you as a heretic who doesn't understand the sacred nature of existence. And it's not just the big sacrifices. Daily life in the Inca Empire was saturated with religious obligations that would exhaust you. Every planting season required ceremonies. Every harvest demanded offerings. Every full moon meant rituals. Every solar eclipse meant days of fasting and prayer. The agricultural calendar was the religious calendar. The work schedule was determined by sacred observances. You couldn't just show up, do your job, and go home. Everything you did was part of a cosmic order that required constant attention and devotion. Let's talk about Inti Raymi, the Festival of the Sun. This wasn't a weekend celebration or a cultural event you could skip if you weren't feeling it. This was a massive, empire-wide religious observance that lasted for days. Everyone participated. Everyone contributed. Everyone demonstrated their devotion to the sun god through elaborate ceremonies, dances, and sacrifices. You'd be expected to fast, to pray, to participate in rituals that could go on for hours. You'd need to know the proper forms of worship, the correct prayers, the appropriate responses to ceremonial calls. Get it wrong, show insufficient devotion, and you're not just being rude, you're offending the gods, and potentially bringing divine punishment down on your entire community. The Inca religious system had priests who spent their entire lives studying the sacred calendar, interpreting omens, and maintaining the complex rituals that kept the empire in harmony with the divine order. These weren't part-time religious leaders, they were full-time specialists who could read the flight patterns of birds, interpret the shape of clouds, and determine the will of the gods from the behavior of sacrificial animals. You'd be expected to understand and respect this system, to participate fully in ceremonies you don't comprehend, to show proper reverence for beliefs that might seem completely alien to your modern worldview. And here's the part that would really mess with your head. It worked. The Inca religious system provided social cohesion, moral guidance, and psychological comfort for millions of people across a vast empire. It gave meaning to suffering, purpose to labor, and hope for the future. The integration of religious belief with political authority, agricultural practice, and social organization created a civilization that lasted for centuries and achieved things that seem impossible even today. But you'd be struggling to fake enough devotion to avoid being labeled a heretic, while secretly horrified by practices that the Inca considered sacred and beautiful. And we haven't even talked about what happens when you inevitably mess up and break one of their laws, which, given your complete inability to understand how this society functions, is probably going to happen very soon. So you've somehow managed to stumble through the religious ceremonies without getting yourself marked as a heretic, though you're pretty sure you've accidentally offended at least 3 different gods by now. But here's where your luck runs out, because in the Inca Empire, the justice system operates on a principle that would terrify any modern person: swift, absolute, and utterly without mercy. The Inca had 3 cardinal laws that governed everything: ama swa, ama liula, ama kula, do not steal, do not lie, do not be lazy. Simple, right? 3 basic rules that any civilized person should be able to follow. Except the punishment for breaking any of these laws is death. Not prison time, not community service, not a fine you can pay to make it go away. Death, usually by being thrown off a cliff, or having your head crushed with a stone club, or being left tied to a rock in the mountains to freeze. The Inca didn't believe in rehabilitation, second chances, or proportional punishment. You steal a potato, death. You tell a lie about your work assignment, death. You show up late to your MITA service because you're still struggling with the altitude. That's laziness, and laziness gets you killed. And here's what would absolutely destroy your modern sense of justice: there are no lawyers, no trials, no appeals process, no innocent until proven guilty. When you're accused of breaking the law, a local administrator investigates, makes a decision, and that's it. Justice is swift, final, and often carried out the same day. Think about how many little lies you tell in a normal day. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible. I didn't get your message. I'll have that report finished by tomorrow. In the Inca Empire, any one of those casual deceptions could get you executed. But it gets worse, because the Inca practiced collective punishment. If someone in your Alu commits a crime, everyone in your family group can be held responsible. Your brother steals food from the state stores. Your entire extended family might be relocated to a harsh frontier region as punishment. Your cousin lies about completing his work assignment. Everyone in your Alu loses privileges. This created a social system where everyone was constantly monitoring everyone else, not out of malice, but out of survival. You couldn't afford to let your relatives screw up, because their mistakes would destroy your life too. And the Inca definition of crime was much broader than what you're used to. Adultery was a capital offense. Disrespecting a noble could get you killed. Failing to show proper reverence during religious ceremonies was a crime against the gods. Even complaining about your work assignment or showing insufficient enthusiasm for state projects could be interpreted as sedition. You know what else was a crime? Being different. The Inca had very specific ideas about how people should behave, what they should wear, how they should speak. Deviation from these norms wasn't seen as personal expression or cultural diversity. It was seen as disruption of the social order that needed to be corrected immediately. Foreigners who were conquered by the Inca had to adopt Inca customs completely. Your native language, your traditional clothing, your ancestral customs, all of that had to be abandoned in favor of Inca ways. Refuse to assimilate, and you'd be killed or relocated to somewhere so remote and hostile that you'd die anyway. But here's what would really mess with your modern concept of justice. Most people in the Inca Empire thought this system was fair. When everyone knows exactly what the rules are, when punishment is swift and certain, when there's no possibility of corruption or wealthy people buying their way out of consequences, crime rates drop to almost nothing. The Spanish conquistadors who arrived in the 16th century were amazed by how safe Inca cities were. You could leave valuable items on the street and come back to find them untouched. Violent crime was almost non-existent. Theft was so rare that many people didn't even bother locking their doors. The system worked because everyone understood that the consequences of breaking the law were absolute and immediate. There was no gambling that you might get away with it. no hoping for a lenient judge, no possibility of plea bargaining your way to a lighter sentence. But you'd be dead within a week, not because you're a bad person, but because you literally don't understand how to exist in a society where every action has immediate, potentially fatal consequences. You jaywalk your way to execution, make small talk that gets interpreted as sedition, or show up to work with the wrong attitude, and find yourself tied to a rock waiting to freeze to death. The Inca built a society with almost no crime by making the cost of crime so high that no one could afford to pay it. Unfortunately, you can't afford not to. The sun sets on an empire that built eternity, and you didn't make it to lunch. Let's be honest about what happened here. You woke up this morning, if we can even call it morning, when you immediately started suffocating from altitude sickness in one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history. An empire that stretched across a continent, that moved mountains to build cities, that organized millions of people with a precision that would make modern governments weep with envy, and you lasted maybe 6 hours. You couldn't breathe their air, couldn't lift their stones, couldn't understand their social structure, couldn't digest their food, couldn't fake their religious devotion, and definitely couldn't navigate their justice system. Everything that made you a functional person in the modern world, your education, your skills, your values, your entire worldview, was not just useless here, it was actively dangerous. The brutal truth is that the Inca weren't primitive people who got lucky. They were master engineers, brilliant administrators, and perfectly adapted survivors who built their civilization in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. They looked at 11,000-foot mountain peaks and said, "This is where we'll put our capital." They looked at vertical cliff faces and said, "This is where we'll grow our food." They looked at impossible logistics and said, "This is how we'll run an empire." And they did it all without wheels, without writing, without iron, without any of the technology we consider essential for complex societies. They had something more powerful than technology. They had absolute mastery of their environment and complete integration between their society and their landscape. But here's the really humbling part. This empire that built impossible cities and organized millions of people fell to 180 Spanish conquistadors, not because the Inca were weak, but because they had no immunity to European diseases, no experience with horses or gunpowder, and no way to comprehend the kind of individual greed and religious fanaticism that drove the Spanish conquest, the same cultural factors that would have killed you in the Inca Empire, the rigid social structure, the absolute religious devotion, the collective responsibility, made them vulnerable to a completely different kind of society that prioritized individual advancement and technological superiority over social harmony and environmental adaptation. So what does this say about human adaptability, about the trade-offs we make when we choose comfort over resilience, individual freedom over collective survival, technological solutions over environmental harmony? The Inca built a society that could last forever in their specific environment. We've built a society that's incredibly adaptable to different environments, but might not last another century in any of them. You couldn't survive a day in their world. The question is, could they survive a day in ours? And more importantly, which world is actually more survivable in the long run? So here we are, back in our heated homes, with our delivery apps and our individual freedoms. And honestly, I'm not sure whether to feel grateful or terrified, because what we just experienced together, this journey through an empire that would have killed us all before breakfast, it's not really about the Inca, is it? It's about us, about what we've gained and what we've lost in the 500 years since Pizarro showed up in Peru with his horses and his smallpox. We've traded environmental mastery for technological dependence. We've traded social cohesion for individual choice. We've traded the ability to build things that last centuries for the ability to build things quickly and cheaply. We've traded deep knowledge of our immediate world for shallow knowledge of everything, and most of us, myself included, can't even change a tire without YouTube, let alone move a 200-ton stone using bronze tools and human ingenuity. The Inca built their civilization by understanding exactly who they were and where they belonged. We've built ours by constantly trying to transcend those limitations. Both approaches have their costs. Thanks for climbing into the clouds with me tonight, for letting me humble all of us together in the thin air of Cusco. Let me know in the comments what part of Inca life would have finished you off first: the altitude, the architecture, or just trying to fake your way through a religious ceremony without accidentally committing heresy. And maybe, just maybe, the next time your Wi-Fi goes down or your food delivery is late, you'll think about those Inca engineers who built roads through the sky, and remember that human beings are capable of absolutely incredible things. Until next time, appreciate that you can breathe at sea level and choose your own job. Those are bigger luxuries than you think.